Now, if you're going to be working in any type of Microsoft administration services these days, there are some fundamental principles that are very important that you understand. So what I want to do is I want to get into some of the foundations of understanding things like Microsoft domains, understanding some of the networking technologies, RAS and VPNs and virtualization, and also we're going to talk about the cloud services and how all that fits into this. But it's important to kind of start from the beginning so you can understand where things have been, understand where things are going, and you have to consider the fact that the world is transitioning now more into a cloud-oriented environment. But in the past, everything was managed on-prem or on-premise, and we got to talk about this transition and how things were and how things are now and where Microsoft is going. So to start with, we go back in time to the 1950s, 1960s. They had mainframes, these gigantic computers that would take up like entire rooms. They used vacuum tubes. And then as we moved into the 1970s, something miraculous happened. They created what was known as an IC, an integrated circuit, which allowed basically binary math to be processed through little chips. And this is where personal computing became popular. So in the 1980s, personal computers started coming out. I'm going to draw this little symbol here to represent a computer. And I tell you what, I'm going to create another little symbol here to kind of represent a bunch of computers. So in the 1980s, companies started buying PCs and personal computers, and they started showing up in people's offices, and eventually, they were networking them together and all of that. And so this is where things really get started. Now, of course, in those days, one of the problems was we lived in what was called a peer-to-peer network. So what would happen is these computers you could network these computers together with various technologies, but there was no centralization, meaning each computer was equal. There was no computer that controls all the other computers. A network admin would have to, if they wanted to make changes, they'd have to sit down at each and every computer to make those changes or get users to help them, which was always a nightmare. And so that didn't, it worked, but it didn't work very efficiently, all right? Now, as we moved into the 1990s, there was a company that was gaining ground called Novell, and they had a product called NetWare, which was the idea of that was to use a server that would help manage machines and also allow people to share files easier. Whereas in a peer-to-peer network back originally, these machines would have to share files with each other and people would have to know each other's passwords. It just didn't work very well. Well, eventually with the creation of the file server concept, you had a more powerful machine that you could share files on and all that. And eventually Novell even came out with the idea of a server that could manage other machines. Now this is kind of where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft created their product called NT, and they created this concept of a domain controller, which is a special type of server that can manage these other servers. Now, fast forward, they came out with what was known as a domain, but fast forward to the year 2000, Microsoft releases their newest domain technology, and they call it Active Directory. And Active Directory domains were represented by a triangle. All right, and a domain controller was a server essentially that had a database on it, and that database was the Active Directory database. So let's just kind of fix that here. This little cylinder looking thing I'm going to make here is going to represent my Active Directory database. So AD. All right, and this is what we still call to this day. We call it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And usually if you hear that term, Active Directory Domain Services, it means it's an on-premise domain. Although there is a version of this that can be hosted in the cloud known as Azure Active Directory Domain Services. I'm not getting into that right now. So anyway, you would always want to have more than one domain controller. The reason you want to have more than one domain controller is because the same reason you have more than one of any type of server, really. One reason being to break up the disbursement of load. These machines will authenticate with these domain controllers, and the more machines you got, you don't want all of that just going to one domain controller, right? The other consideration is redundancy. If you only have one and that server goes down, well, you're in trouble, right? So we want to have multiple. The other thing about domain controllers that are interesting is that they replicate. So, for example, I'm going to make a little smiley face guy here, and this little smiley face guy is going to represent my user. So we create a user account on a domain controller. Now, the interesting thing about user accounts, or the interesting thing really about domain controllers, is that they replicate. So everything you do on one will replicate over to the other. So if I create a user account on that first one, well, replication is going to occur between both of them. And so this little arrow thing I'm going to make here is going to represent replication. So domain controllers replicate. That means that this user could log on to any one of these thousands machines, and it's going to authenticate with the domain controller. All right. The authentication protocol that is used is the protocol known as Kerberos. All right. Kerberos is the authentication protocol. What is a protocol? It's like a language, basically. Okay. Now there was an older protocol that it also supported called NTLM. That was for legacy, for older prior to the year 2000 machines. Now that protocol allowed us to have encrypted passwords and all that, and authenticate securely and all that fun stuff. The other thing is Active Directory uses a language known as the Directory Service Language, and that language was called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now all that is, again, this is all decades old at this point. At the time when it came out, it was cutting edge, but it is a bit dated nowadays. But it still works, and it's still pretty secure, though there are some considerations on security that I'm not going to explain right now. Now, the other thing that's important about Active Directory is that all machines have to have a name. And the name must be, of course, associated with an IP address and all of that. And so there is a service that we use it on the internet all the time, called DNS, Domain Name Service. Our domain must have a name. Usually when you name your domain, you would name it after your company, and a lot of people even name their domains based on their web presence. So for example, my domain might be called examlabpractice.com. That's my company, my web presence. And I'm going to need to have a server in my domain that can associate the names and IP addresses together. So that server is called a DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System Server. And that server will also have to have a little database on it, and that database will be our DNS database. Okay. So we'll just draw another little cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, border it with red, and then I'm going to color code the database red, which means that this database, the DNS database, is associated with that name. Now what happens is our machines, clients, domain controllers, we also might even have, let's draw a file server over here. Pretty common that we have file servers in our environment. Okay. All of these machines would register with our DNS. All right. And this allows for the centralization of name resolution, meaning they register their IP addresses into this database, and then now anytime a machine needs to find another machine, it can query DNS. So for example, these machines all have to authenticate by your domain controllers. They can query DNS and say, hey, DNS, do you know what the address is of one of my domain controllers so I can authenticate? And DNS can reply back and say, yeah, here is the information. At that point, the client can go and authenticate. So it works very efficiently. Now, all of this together, this idea of domain controllers, this triangle you see here, this provides centralization. So we moved away from peer-to-peer networking back in the day where every machine was kind of its own boss and there was no centralized way of managing things, to now we are working in a centralized environment. these domain controllers help us centralize. This DNS service helps us centralize. So we now have some central control over things. One of the great things about our domain controllers too is we have these wonderful things called GPOs, group policy objects. A group policy object is this object that you can create that has all these settings, parameters, any type of attribute you want to configure or change on machines, you can do it through a GPO. So for example, if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to force the firewalls to be turned on all these machines. I want to make sure that the antivirus is always up to date. I want you to disable some of the wallpaper feature. I don't want people putting crazy wallpapers on their machine. So I mean, the sky's the limit. There are literally thousands of things you can do inside of a GPO. But what happens is that GPO can instruct these machines to turn things on and turn things off. GPOs also replicate. So when you create a GPO on a domain controller, it replicates over to the other domain controller. So it doesn't matter which machines authenticate with which domain controller. All right. So these GPOs can be deployed out to these machines, and this is how you turn things on, turn things off. You could even deploy software with that if you wanted to. So it was very, very powerful, a very, very powerful system for managing everything. All right. Of course, let's throw the internet into the mix here. Let's say that this little cloud is going to represent the the internet, and let's talk about a little bit about how that sort of fits into the picture. Let me just clean it up here with the mighty stroke of my paintbrush. I will clean up the internet. All right. All right, so then we have the internet, right? So maybe we've got an internet connection that's coming in here, all right? And of course, you don't want to just leave your internal network exposed, so your company would generally have a firewall, right? And we'll just put that firewall right here. And so now we have a secure way for traffic to flow out to the internet, and the only things that can come in would be things that we send out, and we could allow things through that firewall if we want to. Now, this is a traditional domain. This is the way we've done things for 20 years, all right? And in this next little section, I want to talk about expansion on all of this and where things have gone with things like RAS and all that, and VPN and virtualization. So that'll wrap this little section up, and we'll move on to the next. I now want to talk about some concepts that are also sort of the foundation of how we've done things over the years. It's important to understand how we've done things over the years so we can understand how things are now. So looking back, we have an Active Directory domain, ADDS as it's called, Active Directory Domain Services, which uses the LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which uses Kerberos for authentication, or for this older, for the legacy back in the 90s devices that used NTLM, a New Technology LAN Manager, which isn't all very new these days, but even Kerberos is pretty old considering we've been using it for decades, and I think actually the protocol even came out back in the 1980s. So, so we got some data technologies, but the technologies have been updated, a lot of them over the years, to be secure, so you can still feel comfortable using those. But let's talk about some different scenarios now. The first thing I want to look at is the scenario of what happens when we have a user who is not at the office. So this person is working from home. Working from home is a lot more popular nowadays than it has been in the past, so it's very common. And this person needs the ability perhaps to be able to connect in and access services that are inside. Okay, and we've got a file server, but ultimately you probably are aware that in the past it was always this mindset of do it yourself, host your own server. So your companies might have a file server, but then they might also have a they might have a SQL database server that users need to access. Let's create that SQL. All right. Maybe Microsoft Exchange. that was email, right? Microsoft Exchange was used for email, and then maybe even like SharePoint was very popular by Microsoft on premise. So here you've got these these 4 servers providing a service to our devices, and you've got users working from home and everything else needing to get access to those. Let me just kind of move those a little bit over here, make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to shrink those down just a little bit as well. All right. So this user who is working from home needs to access these services, but the person is not, not around. Well, let me tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just open up all the ports on the firewall and allow this person in to get access to these devices unsecurely. In fact, in the 90s, a lot of companies did that. The very first company I ever worked for, back in the 90s, they didn't really have a firewall, so you literally could share out you had a public address, and you could connect to it from home. It was really scary when I think about it. Even in the 90s, that was scary, but nowadays it's incredibly scary. Why is it scary? Because you got these people out there that want to do things that they shouldn't do, and get access to companies' data and try to do damage and ransom and all of that, ransomware and all that. And who are these people? Well, we generally call them hackers, right? So let me draw a little hacker. This little box here is going to represent my hacker. All right, and let's make this hacker look like he's up to no good. All right, I'm gonna give him let's give him like a devil horns, some devil horns here, and maybe like he's in a bad mood. I'm gonna give him a frowny face, and give him some fangs, and maybe the fangs are dripping blood okay, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away. All right, but anyway, that's going to be my hacker. All right, goofy looking little hacker person. All right, and so we don't want this hacker like spying on my user. We don't want this hacker getting access to resources inside. So how do we get around that? Well, usually the way we would do that is you would use a VPN, a virtual private network. So the way you would do that is you could purchase what was called a VPN concentrator, and basically it's a device that allows secure connections in. But in the Microsoft world, we actually had a type of server we could set up called a RAS server, or also known as an RAS server because it stood for Routing and Remote Access Services. But anyway, remote access services is the idea here, and with that we have support for VPN. Now what does that do? This allows this thing called a VPN tunnel to be created, which means that you have this encrypted communications that goes through to that RAS server, and then from there that RAS server allows you to access other resources securely. This hacker will not be able to see the traffic that's flowing through because it's all encrypted. The only thing the hacker would be able to see is that it was going up to this firewall, and that would be it. Wouldn't be able to see what the traffic said. So this is how we would definitely help secure things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is what happens when a company needs to have a service that is exposed to the internet. For example, let's say that your company is going to host their own web server, okay? So you set up a web server. All right, maybe this is going to be www.examlabpractice.com or whatever, and people from the internet need to be able to get to it anonymously. Well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to put that web server? Are you going to put it internally inside the domain like you see here? And the reason that's scary is because you would have to open up port 443, port 80, which is the HTTP ports, to allow traffic to get in, which means not only could somebody out there on the internet anonymously get into this web server, but technically so could a hacker. And if a hacker was ever to gain access over this website by hacking it, then something called pivoting could occur, where a hacker could actually gain access to these other services that are on your network. And so that's where things are really scary. So you definitely won't want to host it internally most of the time, although there was a way to do something called a reverse proxy. I won't get into that right now. But we would probably want to put this outside, right? So we want to put it out here. But there's something else that's a problem on that. If you put it outside that firewall, you don't have to worry about people getting allowing traffic to come in. But the scary thing about that is the fact that this poor web server is now completely exposed to the internet, so with no protection. So the way around that usually is people would get another firewall. So you'd have two firewalls. This first firewall would be called the internal connected firewall, and then this firewall here would be called the external connected firewall. Now this little network between that, we would call that a DMZ, demilitarized zone, or now the more popular term is perimeter network. Okay, so DMZ, perimeter network are basically the same thing. All right, and so now what you would do is you would only open the ports like port 80, 443, 53 for DNS if you put DNS in there, whatever ports there that you need, and now traffic would be able to get to this web server. Okay, and so even if a hacker somehow hacks this web server, you're not going to allow traffic to pass through this firewall and get to these resources. The only traffic that you might allow would be VPN. Okay, and there's a bunch of authentication and all that has to happen to make that work. All right, so that's the idea of remote access and VPNs in a nutshell for you, as well as the concept of DMZ and the perimeter network idea. Now, the final thing I want to look at with you in this video is the idea of virtualization. So I talked about how in the past it was always the mindset was we got to host everything ourselves. We got to have our own little data center. We got to have our we got to have our own servers, file server, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all that, and it's all got to be hosted by us. And that's the way things have always been done. All right. Now, then what you'll find is as time went on, a company called VMware came out with a way of expanding on virtualization. Just so you know, virtualization is not a new term. Virtualization has been around for a very long time. In fact, the term hypervisor is essentially the software that lets us emulate hardware. And if you can emulate hardware, you can also store software on that emulated hardware. That's the idea of virtualization. That term hypervisor has been around since the 1970s. The idea of even mainframes dividing up processing time and doing shared computing was a form of virtualization. So this is not a new concept, but VMware, they expanded on this idea, and the thing that they did that really pushed the envelope on all this was that, hey, you don't necessarily need 4 different servers. And here's the other thing. Here's the other crazy thing. If you wanted redundancy for those 4 servers, you'd really need 8 servers, right? You could do clustering those together. So you'd have 8 servers to provide redundancy for those. But with virtualization, I can set up a hypervisor server, 1 server, and virtualize those other servers. Now, in the Microsoft world, we call that Hyper-V. That is the software that does this, Hyper-V, hypervisor. Microsoft's not the one that came up with that. VMware is not the first to ever come up with that. VMware was the biggest contributor to this concept, though, so I do have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, now the other beautiful thing, though, about this is you get a really, really powerful machine. You virtualize your machines on those. You get these things called checkpoints in Microsoft. They used to be called snapshots, and a lot of other companies still call them snapshots, where you can make changes without the worry of breaking anything because you can revert back to before the change was made. The other thing that's wonderful about using virtualization is if I want to have complete redundancy, I don't have to have 8 servers. I could literally, purchase another server and have a copy of the virtual machines on that other server. Now I've only got 2 servers as opposed to having to have a total of 8 servers. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature capability that kind of started everything. Another thing that we got, and this is kind of where you start thinking about cloud computing, is with virtualization comes the term elasticity, which basically means that each of these machines can be given a certain amount of RAM processing power, but here's what's interesting about that. If one of the servers isn't using all of the available RAM that it's been given, it can share it with other servers. So for example, this file server has been given more RAM than it needs, and then SQL needs that RAM. The file server can give up some of that RAM over to SQL, and when SQL's done using that extra memory, it can release it back to everybody. It's basically a pool type scenario where it gets released into a pool of RAM and pool of CPU, and they can grow and shrink as they need. And that's the small way of sort of on-premise way of looking at elasticity. Of course, when you get into cloud computing, you'll learn that that can expand across multiple machines across the board in these big data centers, but not to get into that just yet here. But that's the idea. Hopefully that now helps you with understanding that concept of what virtualization is, and with that is really where cloud computing started to come into play, which I'm not explaining in this video. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the concept of the RAS, VPN, as well the DMZ concepts and virtualization. And now in this next section we'll start getting into the concept of cloud services. Now, with the creation of virtualization, this got companies thinking, if we can emulate hardware, we can create these virtual machines, and we can store software on there. We can have operating systems running on that emulated hardware, the operating systems being called guest operating systems. We could technically host these virtual machines for companies for a price as a service. So the idea being, hey, you pay us a fee each month and we'll host your virtual servers, and you don't have to deal with all the headaches of hosting your own data center on premise, and the power that's needed to do that, and the air conditioning that's needed to do that, all the hardware that's needed to do that, as well as the knowledge of how all the hardware works. So this is essentially what a cloud company brings to the table. So various companies like Google and IBM and Microsoft and Apple and all these companies, a lot of them already had tons of data centers, these big massive warehouses all over the world that they could support it. Some of these companies, such as Microsoft and IBM and Amazon, and Amazon being one of the biggest and first, decided to open this up to the public for a fee and allow you to host your services in their data centers. So this is where cloud computing really comes into place. This big cloud here is going to represent cloud computing, mainly the Microsoft cloud computing. And of course, it's all connected to the internet with incredibly fast, high-speed internet connections, fiber connections, and all of that. So there's some terminology or some acronyms I want to talk a little bit about real fast here as we get into this. First off, in cloud computing, there is an acronym we call IaaS. That stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Okay? Infrastructure as a service means that a provider is hosting all of the hardware infrastructure for you, and then they are going to provide you with a way for you to interact with that hardware and utilize their hardware as a service. All right, and this, of course, is where Azure comes into play, Microsoft Azure. Now, you might pronounce that word different. People have different ways of saying Azure. Some people call it Azure. Some people call it Azure. Some people call it, I've even heard it called Azure before, Azure. There's various names for it. In fact, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I decided I wanted to make sure I was pronouncing this correctly. So I was like, I'm going to go to watch the developers. So I started watching videos of the developers, the people who created Azure, and I figured I would determine. The very first video I ever watched, the guy was pronouncing the word Azure, so that's how I say it. But what I further learned is that the Microsoft developers don't agree on how to say it either. Some of them say Azure, some of them call it Azure, some of them call it Azure. So anyway, tomato, tomato, pronounce it however you want to pronounce it, okay? But Azure is Microsoft's main IaaS system. What this is Microsoft is going to host, they've got all these data centers all over the world, and they're going to host their hardware so that you can host on top of their hardware your virtual machines or whatever it is. So you can host virtual machines. Microsoft will also allow you to have access to what are called virtual appliances, like virtual firewalls, also virtual load balancing software, because you can get access to what are called VNets. This is virtual networking, so you can create these virtual networks based on TCP/IP that are running your, in their cloud service with virtual machines on it, and then you can put a virtual firewall. So you can almost like recreate what you're seeing here in an on-premise environment. You can recreate that in the cloud. They also provide virtual storage, so you can store data and backup data out there. They support database hosting, all of that. That's all part of IaaS. Now with IaaS, the model for that, for the most part, is you pay for what you use. So there's an algorithm that looks at how much memory, how much processing power, how much storage that's being used, and then you get a fee each month for what you're using. The good news is they do have a calculator that kind of helps you forecast this. And you can even set alarms to let you know if you're approaching a certain budget that you've got on cost. There's a lot of things out there to help you do that. But that's the idea. You pay for what you use. Okay, now there is another couple of terms I want to mention as well. This next term is called Platform as a Service, and then there's a third term called Software as a Service. So Platform as a Service, PaaS, and Software as a Service. Platform as a Service and software. Let me explain software as a service first, because it's pretty easy to visualize, and then I'll explain platform as a service. So the idea of software as a service is basically they have applications that can be hosted in the cloud service, apps, if you will. These apps are 100% ready to use, ready for you to take advantage of. All you got to do is use those applications. Okay. For example, Microsoft has what's called Office for the web, or it used to be called Office Online. So that's like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can run it from within your web browser. All you got to do is just jump right in and use it. So from an admin standpoint, all we have to do is assign the users that are allowed to use that, and they can go use it, and it's available to them 100%. All they got to do is start using it. There's not really a lot of administration for us. Now, what is Platform as a Service? Well, Platform as a Service is a system in which the majority of the configuration is done for us, but we still have some admin configuration we have to do to use it. For example, with virtual machines, this is 100% IaaS. A virtual machine you can put whatever operating system on there, but you're responsible for the operating system. You're responsible for the software that goes on it. You as an admin have to manage all that. Okay. With Platform as a Service, virtual machines are set up in the background that you don't have any control over. They've already put the operating system on there. They've already put the software on there. You don't have any control over any of that. But there's still some administration you have to do in order to control it. For example, Microsoft has a directory service called Azure AD. Now, this is a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest deals of the things I've gone over so far in this cloud. Azure Active Directory is what we call a platform as a service. It is a directory service that is sort of the cloud version of what you have here called ADDS. So, now I remember when I first heard about Azure Active Directory, I thought, oh, well, this is just like you're just hosting virtual domain controllers in the cloud. No, they have completely redone the concepts of Active Directory. It is completely redone with all new web-based programming languages. It does not use any of the dated stuff like LDAP and Kerberos and all that. It uses industry standard authentication protocols in order to support all the latest and greatest features and capabilities in the cloud. Okay, and so these are where users, passwords, all of that stuff is going to be managed in the cloud. But it starts out with almost nothing in it. So it's ready to use, but you as an admin have to start creating users and all of that. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, what if I want to use my on-premise users in the cloud? Well, stand by, I'll explain that in a second. Anyway, Azure AD is a platform as a service. So is, here's another one, Exchange Online. Microsoft has Exchange Online. That is actually both a platform as a service and a software as a service, in that the admin side of it is the platform as a service, but the user side is the software as a service. Same thing for SharePoint Online. Microsoft has SharePoint Online as well. Same idea there. All right. And then you've got Microsoft Teams. That's the admin side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service. There is OneDrive for Business. That's a cloud storage that we have access to that allows users to store their data out there in the cloud. There is a product called Intune, which is Microsoft's MDM product. MDM, it's also MAM product, so it's both. Mobile device management, that allows us to manage devices. This is one of the most powerful things we have available to us. This is what sort of is replacing the concept of GPOs. This is going to allow us to manage our device settings. Not only can we manage on-premise devices, but we can manage mobile devices. GPOs can only manage devices for Windows. With Intune, we can manage Windows, Android, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, all that stuff. With the help of Intune, we can manage the settings and restrictions. We can deploy software. This is a very, very powerful product, okay, that we have available to us. It even has a thing called autopilot, which will allow us to reconfigure Windows machines and all of that. So very, very powerful stuff that we have available to us. All right. Now, I will tell you that Azure has, Azure definitely has some of the, it has some platform as a service technologies and some software as a services technologies, but the main type of system that Microsoft has created for platform as a service and software as a service is called Microsoft 365. Okay, Microsoft 365. All right, which I forgot to add to my display here. We actually do have apps that are called the Microsoft 365 apps. All right, which formerly they would call them Office 365 apps. They're now, starting to call them Microsoft 365 apps. But the Microsoft 365 services is a cloud service that basically sits on top of Azure. So you have Azure in the background of all this, and the Microsoft 365 sitting on top of it. All right, you can't have a Microsoft 365 account or tenant that doesn't also have Azure. Azure is in the background no matter what. And the other thing to be aware of is both of these share Azure AD. So you'll notice that there are web portals for creating users and things through Microsoft 365 or creating users through Azure. It all ties back to Azure AD. You're going to see the same users no matter what. So these two things are glued together basically. Okay, they're glued together. Now on Microsoft 365 with PaaS and SaaS and all that, you're not really going to be hosting virtual machines, but you're going to be working with these services. Let's just kind of color code some of this real quick. All right. Now again, I do want to add that Azure does have PaaS and SaaS services that I'm not getting into right now, but it's mainly an IaaS based service. That's its main focus. Microsoft 365 is strictly PaaS related and software as a service, SaaS related. It doesn't really have any virtual machines or any of that, though it can interact with them. Okay, so if I was to sort of draw a circle around some of these, all of this stuff you see here would be Azure related, and then all of this stuff you see right here would be the Microsoft 365 related. Now, they both share Azure AD. So I'm going to put a purple circle around that. Red and blue make purple. All right. And so they all link to that. Okay. And so that is how Microsoft handles those concepts. The other thing about Azure is with Azure, you're paying for the CPU, RAM, storage you use. With Microsoft 365, it's all based on licenses. So you purchase these subscriptions that have a certain amount of licenses, and you issue these licenses out to your users, and your users can take advantage of these various features. Okay. One more thing I want to explain here, and that is, what about the issue of what if we want to use our on-premise users to access resources in Azure? Well, Microsoft has a solution for that. They actually have a type of server that you can set up, and the server is called an Azure AD Connect server. Azure AD Connect. Now, what does this do? An Azure AD Connect server, this is a synchronization-based system, and what it will do is it will allow my on-premise users to be synchronized out to Azure AD. Now, it does not allow Azure AD users to be synced in, only out. But it will allow user passwords and all of that to be synced in. So if a user is logging on to Azure AD and they change their password out in the cloud, it does have the ability to synchronize that password back in. But the beauty of this is by going this route, if you have this on-premise environment, you can achieve what we call SSO. What is SSO? Single sign-on. The idea of single sign-on with all of this is my user can sit down at their on-premise computer, they can log on, and it's going to log them on both in the cloud as well, it's going to log them on-premise as well as in the cloud at the same time. All right, and they can access resources out there. The other thing I'll tell you is that Microsoft has moved into a way to where you could technically not even have a domain nowadays. You don't necessarily have to have a domain. In fact, it pains me to say this as a consultant because, I have fed my family for, 2 decades by using Active Directory, both teaching it as well as, consulting on it. But I'll be honest, Microsoft is now moving in a direction to where domains are not even needed anymore. They're now making it possible to where everything can be managed through your cloud service and domains are not needed. But if you're a company that's already got a domain and all this is still in place and all of that, then this Azure AD Connect server is going to be the thing that's going to help you. Okay? All right. Well, hopefully this has now helped you have a better understanding. This was really just a fundamentals video to help you understand the cloud service, the concepts of it, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. I want to spend some time now helping you understand the concept of what the global address list is in Exchange. So this is also just referred to by most people as GAL. So what is the global address list? So this is actually a collection of recipient objects. So in other words, these are objects that can have email addresses associated to them that we can send emails to. These are going to be people within your organization. Is also can be people outside your organization that will have a recipient-based object listed in this list that you'll be able to send emails to. All right. So they'll also contain some recipient properties. So things like the company this person works for, the state, province. The other thing is that this list is not something that's just like manually built. This is an automatically built or dynamically built list that gets updated within your Exchange environment. Okay, so within your Exchange organization. Recipients will get automatically added. There is ways to manually add addresses to the list as well. So when somebody goes into Outlook or Outlook on the web or whatever, and they'll be able to go and if they want to email one of the recipients, they can click to see this list and they can choose the recipient they want to email. So there's three different types of addresses list that you can have in Exchange. You have the GAL, that's the built-in default one that is automatically going to be built of your different mail-enabled objects. This can be filtered. There is just regular address lists, or what we call custom address lists, that you can adjust as well. So this is a subset of recipients that you can kind of group together in a list. You could have a address list called marketing, or one called sales, or you could have an address list for another company that you do business with. And then lastly, we have what's called an OAB, an offline address book. So an offline address book, this is a address list that can be found offline when a user does not have any connectivity with Exchange. Then they can utilize the offline address book. Now, by default, your GAL is going to be associated with your offline address list. Okay, and so you'll have the same recipients there, and when a user re-authenticates and all that, it can synchronize any changes and all of that. But ultimately, that's the idea of an offline address list. You can adjust some of this as well on what shows up offline. A couple other facts here. So the GAL is your primary repository within Exchange. On average, your organizations will have one GAL, but it is possible for users to for you to have multiple GALs. The idea being a scenario where you might have users in your organization that need to have a different set of address list for maybe the organization that they're working in regarding maybe two different companies. So, like, let me give you an example. Let's say that you have some executives. Maybe your company owns another company, and you have some executives in your company that needs the GAL for your company, but also the global address list for the other company. So in their case, you can have multiple GALs that those users can see that other users cannot see. So there is instances where that happens. I'm not saying it's something that's very common, but there is instances where that goes on. Some other facts. So the funny thing about the global address list, all these years, it's never been something you can really graphically control a whole lot. You have to use PowerShell. In case this with Exchange Online, we got to use Exchange Online PowerShell. You can create, modify, remove, and update the global address list. Else, it's just going to handle itself. It's just going to automatically have every recipient that's added in the organization. All right. The GAL is, again, going to be seen by users that are using Outlook on the web, and it is going to be named just GAL, or Global Address List. That's the default name for it. And if you decide to create any other address list, you can create our global address list. You do have to have a unique name for every global address list. So again, if I was in that scenario with two companies, I might have company A's global address list and company B's global address list, but they have to have two different unique names. Users cannot see the name of the GAL they are using, so that's another thing. The name is hidden from the users. To them, it's just going to show up as a global address list. And also, users can only see the GAL that they belong to. If users belong to multiple GALs, they'll still see only one GAL, but there's a few other considerations. First off, for a user to see a specific global address list, the user has to be given permissions, which you do that using something called ABPs, which are known as address book policies. Okay, we'll talk coming up some more on that. If a user is still eligible to see multiple GALs, only in on the largest is used in that case. So if you have a scenario where a user's been given multiple rights and there's multiple GALs that they've been assigned to, it will automatically go after the one with the most recipients. So you do have to be careful. You have to assign specific policies. If you don't do that, then Exchange just kind of takes matters into its own hands. Okay. All right. So now the last thing I want to mention here is the default address list. So when you go into your global address list, it'll be broken up into, you'll have the default global GAL. You'll have a list called All Rooms, which would show all rooms associated in the Exchange environment. You have an all users, shows every user in the Exchange environment, all distribution list, all contacts, all groups, so all the various groups associated. You have an offline global address list and public folders. Now, the other thing I do want to point out is with the help of permissions and policies and all that, we can filter. So you might have scenarios where you don't want certain users to show up for everybody. A good example of that would be if you think like Microsoft, for example. Take Microsoft. You have like Bill Gates at Microsoft.com. Bill might have a special email address, and he doesn't want everybody in the company, or you don't want everybody in the company emailing Bill questions. So Bill might have a unique address, and only certain people, Bill's email address will only show up in certain email lists, and so only certain people know what that is. That's just an example, but in certain scenarios, you might want to be able to filter what is showing up in everybody's address list. All right. So hopefully that now gives you a decent overview of the concept of what the global address list does for us. Now, the first thing we need to be aware of when it comes to managing and dealing with global address list is just how does it get populated. And if we go over to, let's just go over to portal.office.com, or if you want to go to www.microsoft365.com, it's basically going to take you to the same place. We can open up the Outlook on the web right here. That's going to bring us into Outlook, and from there we can go over here. We can click on this little people icon, and if we scroll down, you'll see the default global address list listed here. You'll see all rooms, all users, districts. Those are your default lists that are available. There's the offline. Okay, so how does this list get populated? Now, again, if you've built your own little environment, your environment may look a little different than mine. You got to understand that I am constantly, trying to keep the courses updated, and so videos are kind of getting switched in and out when Microsoft makes changes, and I need to update my videos. So don't worry if you're looking at your own environment, if you're doing this with me and you don't see the exact same things here that I've got. That's not a big deal. Don't worry about that. I'll tell you when things are important that you need when you're doing this stuff with me, if you're doing this stuff with me, and things that you don't. Okay, so don't worry about it. If you don't see the same things I've got over here, it's not a big deal. But anyway, this is the default global address list that's built. How does it get built? Well, if we jump back over to portal.microsoft.com, which brings us into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Okay, if we go down, first off, if we look at users, and then we look at active users, and again, don't worry if you don't have the same users as me. That's not a big deal. But every user, every user that has a license, a Microsoft 365 license, Office 365 license, they will automatically get a recipient created, and that'll automatically get created in our global address list. So if I look at John Christopher right here, myself, and I look at licenses, you can see that I have my Office 365 E5 license and all that. Again, it does not matter. If you look at this screen and you don't have the same licenses as me, that does not matter. Okay. Only one I'm caring about in this case is E5. Yours could say Microsoft 365, E3 or E5. It does not matter. As long as it has an Exchange license associated with it, you're pretty much good to go. Well, from there, at that point, that's going to automatically populate. And the other thing that's going to populate is if we come over here to where it says Teams and Groups, and we click on Active Teams and Groups, we can create groups. These Microsoft 365 groups, if I say add group, create myself a Microsoft 365 group, this group will automatically get a email address associated with it as well. Now, I'm not diving deep into what all these groups are right now, so don't worry if you're looking at some of this and you don't really understand the difference between a Microsoft 365 and a security group or any of that. Don't worry about that right now. But if I can use this, I can create a Microsoft 365 group, and it'll create me an email to collaborate with. And basically what happens is you can email the group. It goes to everybody in the group. So if I create a group called Finance, all right, I can assign an owner to that if I want. I'll just assign myself, even though I'm not really finance. All right, just add myself. Okay, I can add members to that. The owner is somebody that can add people to the group if they want, remove people from the group, and then members are just members of the group. And then if I want to give it a name, I'll just say finance@examlabpractice.com. Okay, I can go ahead and associate a Microsoft team with this if I wanted, but then I would click next and I would click create group. And at that point, it's now going to create that group. All right. This does take some time, but now if I, eventually I can jump over here and to my global address list and all that, and I can see the information that should be populated there. All right, so like for example, we go down here to all groups, you can see the finance group is already populated. So if I wanted to, I could send an email to finance@examlabpractice.com. It's going to go to everybody in the group. Okay, so again, everybody is assigned the default global address list. Now I want to talk about getting into the concepts of if you did need to create a new global address list, how all that's going to work. And that, of course, is going to involve Exchange Online PowerShell. Now, before we can jump into PowerShell and do all that, there's something you should be aware of. First off, you have to give permission to somebody to be able to mess with address list in Exchange Online. So I want to jump over and I want to see how we can go about doing that. All right, so we're going to go over to portal.microsoft.com. All right, we're going to click the show all ellipse symbol. We're going to jump into Exchange. That's going to bring us into Exchange Online. Keep in mind that this interface is constantly changing, so it wouldn't surprise me if your screen looks a little different than mine. But we're going to go over here to Roles, and we're going to click Admin Roles. And from there, we're going to create an admin role, and I'm just going to call this Address List Admin. All right, so we'll click Next. We're going to add the address list role, basically a permission. And then we're going to click Next, and we're going to put, I'm just going to add myself as the person who has this privilege. Okay, and just to verify that I'm putting in the right person, because I have created myself a few times in my own environment here. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to click Add Role Group, and there we go. So at that point, we can click on Address List Admin, Assigned, and John Christopher at examlabpractice.com. CJC. Yeah, there we go, John Christopher. The only thing that gets a little crazy with that is just the fact that I've created myself a few different accounts in some of my different demonstrations with some of my other courses, and I want to make sure I got the right one. All right, so there we go. We've added John Christopher, and because the user that you add must have a mailbox, and so John Christopher does in this case. In your case, if you were doing this with me, then you would add yourself. If you're not doing this with me, that is totally fine as well. It's okay just to watch if you want. Okay, so we've got all of that. Everything should be set up correctly. Let's just double check and make sure John Christopher's added. Yep, so we're all good there. The next thing we need to do is we're going to open up PowerShell. Right click Start. PowerShell as an admin. All right. Now a couple quick things. In order to, first thing you got to do is install the Exchange management PowerShell module. But the catch to that is you got to make sure you can run scripts on the machine. By default, Windows machines do prevent you from running scripts. So if you haven't already done this, you're going to do set-execution policy, and we'll set execution policy to unrestricted. All right. Hit yes, and there you go. You can't. This is going to loosen the security on your machine and allow PowerShell scripts to run, but you got to do that. You can always set it back to restricted once you are done, and all you got to do is just run that command there. Okay. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to type install-module, and then it's going to be called, so this is the Exchange management commands. You got to have these commands, these Exchange Online Management commands, in order to be able to connect and utilize Exchange Online. Okay, so the command is install -module Exchange Online Management. Now in my case, I've actually installed this before, but I have an older version, so I want to overwrite the older version. So I'm going to say allow clobber, and then I'm going to say force. That just means just confirm everything if it asks questions. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. The other thing is, if this is the first time you've ever done anything like this, you may get a message that says you need to install NuGet. NuGet is a PowerShell gallery downloading provider. It's going to let you download commands off the internet. The other thing that may happen is it may pop up a message and tell you that you are installing from an untrusted version of PowerShell, a untrusted gallery. That's because the PowerShell gallery is, even though it's owned by Microsoft, it's a community-driven thing. Okay. All right. Oh, turns out I do have the latest version, so I'm good. All right. So that's done. Now I'm just going to type import -module. This is going to import it and put it into memory here. Exchange Online Management. Hit enter. Okay, it's in memory, and we're going to connect. So we're going to say connect -exchange online, and I'm just going to hit enter, and it's going to pop a little box up on my screen here, and I'm just going to authenticate. Okay, this will take just a moment for that to properly get connected. Now we're just going to check to see if the commands are there. So I'm going to type get -command -noun star global address star. And as you can see, the commands are available. Now, let me warn you, if you're doing this along with me, and this is the first time you've ever done this before, you might need to wait 30 minutes before the commands will appear. And the idea is you just set assigned permissions through the Exchange Online console, the admin center. You did it through the role, and it sometimes takes a half hour or so before it takes effect. So if you were to run this command and you don't see the commands listed there, here's my advice. Close the PowerShell window, wait 30 minutes, and then come back and then reconnect, open PowerShell back up, reconnect, and the commands should be there. Okay. If not, then you need to go back through my video and watch it again and do all the steps again, wait the 30 minutes, and then try again. But if you've done all that, you should have these commands. Okay. And so you should be good to go. The next thing would be, I want to look at the help documentation on this. All right. So if I copy that and I just open up my web browser here, I'll just paste it and I'll do a search for in Google. You can use Bing as well, and you'll see the command. So if you look through this document here, you'll see that it tells you what the syntax is. You can type new -global address list, give it a name, and then from there you can assign specific values, what are called custom attribute values, that you want it to use to make decisions on who's part of this, which contacts are part of this global address list. There's an example right here, new -global address list, right there, -name. I could copy that, go right here, paste that in, hit enter, and that's going to create me a new global address list. If I type get -global address list, you can see the new global address list. Now, the other thing is, if you want to use a filter, they give an example that gal agency B is going to be the name of this one, the recipient, and they're saying, okay, the recipient filter says recipient type is equal to the user mailbox, so it's going to be looking at user mailbox, and it's going to say, and the custom attribute 15, and they just chose a numeric value, custom attribute 15, and then it says agency B. So with user accounts, you can have custom attributes with those user accounts, and that custom attribute number 15 apparently for the users has been assigned to that agency B. And you'd have done that through the user account itself. But if we scroll down, we can look further into this. if we go to, let's look for recipient filter. Here it is right here. All right. And so we can use operators with the word like to, say, oh, it looks like this, sort of like a wildcard scenario. You can specify specific values, so like a value being in a property of some kind. So like, for example, if I wanted to have it, look for the value sales under the user's department, I could do that if I wanted to. Or using the word like, you can use wildcards and all that for searching for specific parameters that you want to use there. All right. So they give an example of doing that. We could actually copy that one too if we wanted to, paste that in, and it would create this gal agency. But you could obviously just change that to whatever you want. So now we should have 3 global address lists. If I type get global address list and hit enter, you can see we have the new one with the default one, and then the gal agency B one that we just created. Okay. So that's how you create global address list using PowerShell. Now, this does not really get into the policies, the address book policies that are going to allow you to assign a specific address book to a user. I'm not showing you that in this video. I'm just showing you how you could, get in the PowerShell, get the Exchange Online management installed, and then create a gal if you wanted to. And then you can use the recipient filters to filter what's in there. Okay. All right. So that is the process for just creating a gal. You can modify existing gals. Again, if you type get command -noun star global address star, you can see that you can modify a global address list. If I do a quick search for set -global address list and hit enter, I can see the command document, the help document for that. And there's even examples on modifying it, and then the different parameters that you can modify. So you can modify it that way. So as of yet, and this has been the case, Microsoft started using PowerShell to manage this back in 2007 when Exchange 2007 came out. And a lot of people believed over the years they'd eventually add a graphical way to sort of manage this, but they just haven't. You still have to use PowerShell to manage global address list. And you can use the graphical tool for like adding context to a user, a specific user, through the user's like Outlook and all that, but you can't really modify the global address list using a graphical tool as of yet. And who knows if they'll ever do that. I mean, think about it. We're talking 2007. People have wondered if they would add a graphical way to do it, and they haven't. So here we are all these years later, and they still haven't added a graphical way to do it. So you still have to be aware that if I want to manage, modify, create global address list, I'm going to do that with PowerShell. I now want to talk about offline address books, also known as OABs. Now, what are offline address books used for? So this is a downloadable address list that can be utilized when somebody is disconnected from Exchange Online. So they're not connected, maybe they don't have an internet connection. That's sort of the idea. You can kind of think about this. Imagine a user who is on an airplane right now. They don't have an internet connection. Maybe they've got a 4 or 5 hour flight, and they're flying, for business purposes, and they got to fire off a bunch of emails, and they could sit there and they could write all these emails out and go ahead and click send. And then what happens is they would obviously go into a state where the emails will get sent once the person has an internet connection. So as soon as they hook back into the internet, they'll send the emails. But the idea being, if this user needs to send a bunch of emails to people, they are going to need an address list so they can find the names of the users that they want to send emails to. So the offline address book would be readily available to somebody even if they are currently not connected to the internet. Okay. Now, as an admin, we get to decide which address lists are going to be available to our users offline. And then what happens with offline address books is they just automatically get generated and modified every 8 hours. So approximately every 8 hours, your Outlook, when you're sending and receiving and all that, it would check for updates and all that fun stuff. Now, how do users download an offline address book? How can it be triggered? You can open up Outlook, go to the File menu, Account Settings, download your address book. Okay, and from there you'll get a little dialog box. You can say download changes since last send receive. You can also choose from an address book you want to download offline. So if the user has multiple address books, it'll download an offline copy, and then they would just click OK. So pretty straightforward from a user standpoint. Now, some conditions that may cause a full download of a offline address book in Outlook. Well, there's some scenarios where you might get a scenario where Outlook will always just do full download of the offline address book. One being if there's no offline address book on the client computer at all. So maybe this is the first time you've connected Exchange Online. Another would be if the version of the offline address book on the server and the client don't match, then it'll do a full download. Another being if there's one or more offline address book files that are missing from the client computer. And then also if a previous full download was to fail, so maybe they attempted to download the offline address book, but it was to fail for some reason, it'll just start over. And then lastly, if you have a user who has multiple MAPI profiles on the same Outlook client, the computer, and they basically have to switch between the two profiles that both use what's called a cache exchange mode. You have multiple full offline address book downloads of the same OAB files. It'll pull that way. In other words, think about it like this. MAPI is the mail application programming interface. This is sort of like the protocol it'll use to communicate with the Exchange. And if you had a scenario where you have maybe multiple email addresses that a user is switching back and forth on, that would be when that type of scenario would happen. Okay, so where users trying to switch back and forth between multiple profiles, and it uses what's called cache exchange mode, which just basically lets you cache things like your offline address book and emails and all that fun stuff. And unless that's disabled, it's generally going to be allowed. All right. So that is how the conditions that cause a full download of the offline address book. All in all, offline address books are pretty straightforward. I would recommend knowing that acronym, remembering that acronym, and just remember the purposes of offline address books. You know what the benefits of it is, and you'll be fine. At least that's the purpose of this video, is to try to help get across that information. Now, for management of an offline address book, the first thing to make sure is you got to have the address list permission given to the admin who's going to manage it. So if I go to portal.microsoft.com, go to show all ellipse symbol, and then click Exchange, just brings me back over into Exchange Online. If I drop down roles and go to admin roles, I have this. I can say add role, and then I've already done this. I'm just kind of showing you quick. You can give that permission. I've actually already done that with, I just created this right here, this role group, address list admin, and that was the process for doing it. The next is if you want to create a offline address book, you can do that. If you do a quick Google or Bing search on create an offline address book in Exchange Online, scroll down, this little command right here. So new dash offline address book dash name dash address list. I can actually do that in PowerShell. So if I open up PowerShell, make sure I've installed the Exchange management and all that configuration, which I've already done. Connected to Exchange, connect dash Exchange Online. Already done that. And then I can paste this command in, hit enter, and that's going to create the OAB. And I just went with the default name here, but obviously you could set the name to whatever you want. Okay. So that takes just a moment. It'll create the offline address book. Okay, you can see now that it has been it's been created. You can see the name of the identity. Now, if you want to remove an offline address book, you can type remove So instead of new dash offline address book, you just type remove dash offline address book. And then the identity would be /OAB Contoso. That's one I just created. It says, do you want to remove it? Yes, we're going to remove it. Okay, so we deleted it. Now, when an offline address book gets added, and you want to allow users and all that to use it, users can pull up Outlook, and I've got Outlook already installed. If you don't have Outlook installed, if we just go to portal.office.com and just got to wait on it to load up here. Yeah, right here, install apps. So I could go ahead and just install all the Microsoft 365 apps. So if you're kind of playing around with this stuff and you don't already have like the Office apps and stuff installed, you would just go right here, download it, install it. It'll take about 15-20 minutes, but then at that point we can open up Outlook, which I've already got open. Let me just kind of shrink it down a little bit here. And it gives me an opportunity to sign in to jc@examlabpractice.com. I can go to the file menu, I can go to account settings, and then right there is where you can choose to download the offline address book. If it's been updated, you can download the latest copy of it and all that. But at that point, I can go into Outlook, and so I can see which users are available. If I was disconnected from my internet connection or something like that, I can have access to which users are available. Okay, so that is the idea of the offline address books. Pretty straightforward to use. Again, for creating it, modifying, and all that, you still have some PowerShell commands that you have to use for doing that. And again, if we go back over to PowerShell, I can type git command -noun star, we'll say star offline address star, and I can see the commands. You've got set offline address book as well. If we do a quick Google or Bing search for that, you can pull up the article on it and you can see the syntax for that. So if you want to modify something, you can modify certain parameters. The various parameters are listed right here. Okay, so there's lots of different parameters that you can modify and alter about that. We're not getting into all the details on that right now. Okay, but hopefully that does give you understanding now of the process. If I wanted to get in and add an offline address book or modify it, most of that is going to be done through PowerShell. So now I want to show you how we can work with address book policies, and to do this I'm going to be in PowerShell. So if I right click, start, go to PowerShell as an admin. Once I'm in PowerShell, I need to make sure that I've connected to my Exchange Online. Alright, so we just authenticate, make sure we're connected, and then I have a nice little tutorial here. I'm going to try to make this little file available to you so you can download it if you just do the little drop down that's available over the video. But the example is this. Let's create a couple of global address lists called Contoso and Fabricam. So we're going to pretend like there's two companies, Contoso, Fabricam. These are two company names Microsoft always likes to use in their examples. So if I copy this command right here, this is new global address list, name Contoso Gal, include recipients, all recipients, conditional company Contoso. If I hit enter on that, it's going to create the gal. So that gal's been created, and then if we copy this again, copy the second command, we'll paste that in, we've created a second gal. Alright, so then we'll come over here and create some additional address lists. So these would be some address lists that kind of be like subcategories for the gal, just containing maybe Contoso users or Fabricam users. So we'll go ahead and copy that in there as well. So we'll just paste. Okay, we've created that address list, and then we're going to create this new address list called Fabricam. So we'll paste that in. Alright, so we've created the address list. Now we're going to create some room lists. So these would be like, they could be like conference rooms, meeting rooms that be represented for users to find in their Outlook environment. So we'll do some rooms for Contoso. Alright, those have been created. and then we'll do the rooms for Fabricam. Paste that in. So those have been created now as well. So we'll come back over here. Now we'll create the offline address books. We'll create an offline address book for Contoso, OAB Contoso. All right. And then we will copy and do this for Fabricam as well. Of course, the offline address books do take a little more time than the other items do. So we do have to give that a little bit of time to process through here. So we'll just wait on that to finish. Okay, that's done. We'll paste in and we'll do the Fabricam one. Now, continuing on here, this is where we'll create the policies. So you have new dash address book policy, the name Contoso, the address list will include the Contoso list up here, offline address book we created, the global address list we created, as well as a room list. So that's what we're going to use to create our policy with. All right. So we'll copy that, paste that in, we'll hit enter, and we've now created that policy. So that's how you're creating the address book policy using that command. We do the same thing for Fabricam, create a policy for Fabricam, hit enter on that. We've now created the Fabricam one. So it's the same idea. And then if you wanted to assign to your users, you can do this here. Get dash recipient filter. So that's looking for Exchange Online recipients, right? You're filtering the company by the name Contoso and recipient details by user mailbox. So you're only wanting to assign this to users with that have a mailbox. And then you're going to set the mailbox address book policy to Contoso. So if I copy that, paste that in, hit enter, there you go. We've now assigned it to anybody that's got the name Contoso in there. And then we'll copy this one, and that's going to assign it to anybody that's got the name Fabricam. And that's it. All right. That is the process. I know that's kind of a lot. If you're a big organization, though, this could come in handy. And again, I am going to provide this this kind of walkthrough for you here on performing those steps. Okay. And so you can kind of go through and practice, or if you just want to read through these, you can. I'll try to make these available to you so you can download it over the video. Okay. That is the process for doing that. Of course, if you want to remove all of this stuff, you can remove it. You can use remove address book policy to remove. If you want to remove the offline address book, remove dash offline address book, specify the name, remove the address list. You can get rid of all that stuff if you want. Okay, that way if you no longer want it, you can use the remove command. All right, but that's going to be the process for working with these address book policies. One other thing I wanted to show you as I finished up that PowerShell segment, I realized there was something else I needed to show you involving that. I said that there isn't really a lot of graphical support for this. There is one thing you can do graphically involving these policies, and that is if you go to the Exchange Admin Center. So again, you just go to portal.microsoft.com, click Show All, click Exchange. That'll bring you in here. From there, you go to your mailbox recipients, and again, it does not matter if you do not have the same recipients as me. If you're doing any of this with me, it does not matter. You do not need the same recipients as me. But I'm just going to pick myself. And if I come right here, you'll notice that I can click on Mailbox, and then I can scroll down. It says Manage Mailbox Policies, and there it is, Address Book Policy, and you'll see that those two address book policies are available. So I can manually, specify a specific user to have one of these policies. So there isn't like a bunch of graphical support for creating the policies or any of that, but there is support for assigning an individual policy to a user. So, all right. So hopefully that gives you a much better understanding of the concepts now of these address book policies. I now want to talk about a nice little feature we have with Exchange Online that allows us to control the sharing of certain information with domain names maybe outside our organization. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we partner up with a company called Contoso, and we need to share free busy information, so a user needs to be able to mark themselves as free busy on their calendar, and maybe mark calendar information, make that information available with somebody that's outside the organization, have a different domain name or whatever, like contoso.com. Maybe we work for exchangelabpractice.com and we want to support this other company and share free busy information and calendar information with them. So we can do that, and I'd like to show you how we would go about doing that. Here we are on portal.microsoft.com. We're going to click the show all ellipse symbol and click Exchange. That's going to bring us into the Exchange Admin Center for Exchange Online. And then once we get there, there's a little drop-down blade called Organization. We're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to click Sharing. And then there's two things here. So you have Organization Sharing. This would allow you to share domain information for the entire organization if you wanted to. So I could go and I could support free busy information for the entire organization. Or what I want to do is individual sharing. So this lets me support a sharing policy for just individual mailboxes. We have a default one that we can use that pretty much it just says, hey, users can share with whoever they want. But I'm going to go right here to add individual. We'll just call this Contoso, and we'll click Next. Specify our domain name, so we'll show sharing with all domains. We'll say specific domain, contoso.com. You can share your calendar folder, freebies information, time only, subject and location, time, subject, location, and title. You can also share contacts folders if you want. So you can specify, what all you would like to share there. We would click Save once we've done that. We click Next, and then at that point it creates our policy. All right. So that's now been created. So now if I go over to my recipients and then mailboxes, I'm going to click on that. And don't worry if you're doing any of this with me, you don't have the same recipients as me. That doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. Just click on a recipient, maybe your user account or whatever that does have a mailbox. In my case, that's John Christopher. And then I'll go over here to where it says mailbox. And then you can see right now we're using this default sharing policy. We can click Manage Mailbox Policies, and then we can drop this down and we can attach and say, okay, sharing policy is Contoso. At that point, we click Save, and now our user has the ability, to share with Contoso. We can block from sharing with anybody else if we want. All right. So pretty straightforward concept. Nice little feature that we can enable. Don't forget, of course, again, you can set it for the whole organization, just kind of a general blanket one, and then you can be more restrictive if you want with individual sharing. But that is how organization sharing policies work along with individual sharing policies. Now, if we go over to Microsoft365.com as a user and we go into Outlook, this brings us into Outlook on the web, right? And Outlook on the web is a web-based interface, of course. It lets me use Outlook and check my email and all that fun stuff. But there may be scenarios where you want to restrict what users can utilize while when they're in Outlook on the web. All right. And so there is what we call Outlook on the web app policies that we can put in place to restrict users on what they're allowed to use when they're within this environment. Okay, so let's talk about how we can do that. If we go over to portal.microsoft.com, click Show All, and then click Exchange, that'll bring us into Exchange Admin Center. From there, we're going to drop down right here where it says Roles, and we're going to click on Outlook Web App Policies. All right, so that'll bring us into that Outlook Web App Policies, and then from there, you'll notice there's a default one that can be modified or changed. We can click it and manage features and all that. We can click to create a new one. All right, I'm just going to call this Outlook. We'll put just OWA demo policy here, and then I'll click Next. And then here is where I get to choose the things I'm going to allow. Now, if you're not sure what some of these are, just hover over the little eye symbol and it tells you what all these are. But I can turn certain things on, certain things off that I don't want to allow. I've got information management. I can enable or disable some of these things as well. Change password, enable or disable some of this stuff as well. time management, same thing. I'm just going to turn everything on in my case. So we'll click next. Then you've got view and access attachments. Select how your users can access and view email attachments from public and private computers. Public or shared computers let users open files attached to email messages when using a public computer. So if they're logged on and the machine they're logged on to is considered a public computer based on its firewall settings and all that, then at that point you can say allow it or don't allow it. And then private, you can also say allow it or don't allow it. So if it's private, you're on a private network. That's what private networks would be considered a trusted network. All right, so we'll click next, and then we'll click to create, and we've now created our little policy there. All right, so that policy has now been created. Now we want to apply the policy to a user. So what we would do is go into recipients, mailboxes, select the user that we want to apply this to, and then scroll down right here on the General tab, and then right here where it says Manage Email App Settings, we'll click that, and then you can see that currently the Outlook Web App Mailbox policy is this one right here. So if I just cancel that, I can do a search for what's available, and there it is, OWA Demo Policy. Select that, click Save, and I've now applied it. Keep in mind, let me warn you, if you test this out, it can take 15 minutes to, I'd say 45 minutes for this to take effect. So if you start jumping around Outlook web app and all that, and you're not seeing anything change, if you tried this out and then like had a bunch of stuff disabled, and then you come in here to see if it's disabled, you're gonna need to give it some time. Okay. But other than that, as you can see, a pretty easy system to configure, pretty straightforward, and you're welcome to give it a shot, jump in and configure it, create your own policy and give it a shot, test it out if you want, or you're welcome to go ahead and move on. I'd now like to go over the concepts of recipients and resources in Exchange. Now, the first thing to be aware of when it comes to recipients and resources is these are going to be objects in the Exchange Online organization that can receive email or relay email through the Exchange environment. Okay. Now there's different kinds, and that's what we want to get across here. So let's take a look. First, we'll just talk about the direct recipient types that we have in Exchange Online. So first, you've got a user mailbox. Now, a user mailbox, this would be the traditional type of email account that you would think of in Microsoft Exchange. In this scenario, you would have an actual user account within the organization, within our environment, that has a mailbox associated with them. This mailbox can send and receive email messages. They have a calendar. They can have their own contacts, their own tasks, all of that stuff associated with them. So this would be your traditional type of mail-enabled user. So again, if I had a user named John Smith, and this user is part of the examlabpractice.com Exchange Online organization, then maybe your email address, John Smith's email address, might be johnsmith@examlabpractice.com. Okay. The next you have is called a shared mailbox. Now, a shared mailbox is a type of mailbox that's designed to be utilized by multiple people. So, for example, you might have a scenario called maybe you got like a help desk or something, and there's like maybe 2 or 3 people that are part of help desk, and you just want the email to be like helpdesk@examlabpractice.com. Well, you could have these 2 or 3 people that just share that same email account. Okay, if you don't want it tied to any specific person. So that's the idea. All right. Key thing here, user mailboxes will require an Exchange license, but shared mailboxes do not require a license for Exchange Online. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right. The thing to understand though is that the users themselves will still have their own user mailbox, which will need a license, but the shared mailbox can be accessed by those users and sent and received email through those users. So I don't want you to misinterpret that, okay? So the shared mailbox itself doesn't need a license, but the users who are using their own email account and linking to that shared mailbox will. Next, you have a mail contact. So a mail contact is a contact that has been added to like the global address list in Exchange. This person may have a email address that is outside of the organization. So think about it from the standpoint of maybe a user that our company does business with a lot. Maybe something like Jane Doe at contoso.com. So this person that maybe works with another company, and we want to have that user as a contact that our users can all go to through the global address list. That's the idea, okay, of a mail contact. Users can also add their own mail contacts within their own mailbox. Then you've got mail user, or what is also referred to sometimes as mail-enabled user. So a mail-enabled user is a user that has a user account in our Exchange organization, but they're more like a mail contact. They don't have a full-blown mailbox or anything like that. They have their own. They can have their own email address associated with it as well. So you can think of like a consultant, right? Maybe a contractor. So instead of Jane Doe at contoso.com being just a mail contact, maybe Jane Doe at contoso.com is a consultant. Jane Doe can have a user account in our organization. So you could have a user, Jane Doe at examlabpractice.com, but Jane Doe's email address can still reflect Jane Doe at contoso.com if you want. So that's the idea of a mail-enabled user. You can also, with that, if you want, make it where if somebody emails Jane Doe at examlabpractice.com, the email gets forwarded to Jane Doe at contoso.com. So she keeps it on her, real email address at her company if she was a consultant. So that is the idea of a mail-enabled user. Okay, so it's a contact. It's like a contact, similar. But in this case, whereas a mail contact would not have a user account in our organization, a mail-enabled user would have an email account that they could use to perform actions within our environment. Okay. The mail users do not require a license because, again, they are keeping their own email wherever that's at. All right. So continuing on, so let's look at resource and group recipients here. So the next up is called a room mailbox. So a room mailbox is a type of recipient that represents a room somewhere in a building, okay? Or somewhere in a building, it's going to represent some kind of a room in that building. Usually, companies will use these for things like meeting rooms, conference rooms. So imagine you've got a building and you've got maybe 3 conference rooms: conference room A, conference room B, conference room C. And you might even have like a building number or something associated with it. So you could name the room mailbox based on that. It could be something as simple as as room A at examlabpractice.com, room B at examlabpractice.com, or you could do something like, maybe we're talking about a specific building number. Based on the address, you could, if the address was something like 123 ABC Street, in New York City, then it might be, NY 123 building, or meeting room A, and then so on and so forth, meeting room C, so on, however you wanted to do it. So you kind of have to be creative. If you're a big organization, you've got a lot of buildings and a lot of meeting rooms that you got to do this, you do have to kind of be a little bit creative about the naming convention that you use there. But if you're a small business or whatever, it's as simple as something like room A at examlabpractice.com, room B at examlabpractice.com. Another option is a lot of companies like to name their meeting rooms unique across the organization. So, for example, some companies have named them things like after flowers, right? So you might have a room called the Rose. So you could literally have a room mailbox called the Rose Room at examlabpractice.com, so on and so forth. So then you've got an equipment mailbox. These will represent pieces of equipment for scheduling. It's kind of like with the room mailbox. You might have a meeting room, but you might need certain equipment, like maybe a really expensive projector or something for that room. If the room does not have its own projector, then yeah, a lot of companies, that have projectors that are just in the room and they're mounted and you can't move them. But in some organizations, you have to share equipment, right? So you might have a projector. So projector 1 at examlabpractice.com, projector 2. The purpose of this is for scheduling. So I could schedule a meeting room for a meeting on the calendar, and I could then schedule a piece of equipment maybe I need for that. So, hey, we're gonna meet in the room A and we're gonna use projector 1. And so we can schedule all that. That way you don't have people just misusing equipment, grabbing equipment anytime they want without there being some kind of organization to it. Next up, we have groups. So there's various types of groups that are used, some older than others. One of the oldest types of groups that Exchange supports is called distribution group. This is sometimes just referred to as a distribution list. A distribution group is just a group that you can link your mail-enabled users and all that to. And what happens is anytime somebody emails that group, it would go to all of the users that are linked in that group. So for example, if you had a distribution group called sales at examlabpractice.com, somebody emails sales at examlabpractice.com, the email is going to go to the users that are in the group. Okay. This group does not have a calendar, shared calendar. It can't have permissions linked to it or any of that stuff. It's not going to be linked to a Microsoft Teams. There's nothing fancy about a distribution group. Main thing too is, again, you can't assign any kind of permissions with it. Next up is a mail-enabled security group. Now, mail-enabled security groups are like distribution groups in that they get an email address. So sales at examlabpractice.com. You can put users in it just like that. If you email the group, it goes to everybody in the group. However, the big thing here is that security groups can be given permissions to resources. So you can assign permissions to things like SharePoint sites and all that fun stuff. But it doesn't create a SharePoint site when you create this type of group. And it does not create a Microsoft team or any of that. And you'll see why in just a moment. I'll explain why I keep saying that, why that's important. Okay. Next up, you have what's known as a dynamic distribution group. A dynamic distribution group is a group that you can assign some conditions to, where it'll periodically check to see if somebody should be a member of that group. So the idea being, for example, instead of me statically having to put salespeople in the group, I can assign a condition that says, hey, every user that has the name sales as their department attribute for that user, automatically put them in the group. If they don't have the name sales associated with their department attribute, take them out of the group. Now, I'm also going to tell you that this is sort of the old way of doing things, because you can now do this with Microsoft 365 groups and regular security groups as well. But it's kind of hard to visualize that on this screen, so I really wouldn't worry about it right now. I just want to let you know that it is possible. This is sort of the old way of doing it. There's better ways to do it with some of the other groups now. All in all, I'll tell you what, most companies really don't use those three types of groups a whole lot anymore. They're kind of older style groups. Let me tell you what everybody's using nowadays. It's called a Microsoft 365 group. Okay, and with a Microsoft 365 group, this is a group that can pretty much do everything. This group can be used as a distribution list. So, in other words, if you had a Microsoft 365 group called sales at examlabpractice.com, the users that you put in it, if you email that group, the email is going to go to everybody in the group. Okay. Secondly, they have a shared calendar. Third, they actually can create a Microsoft team. So when they're using Microsoft Teams, they can open up Teams and there'll be a team called Sales. And so it's great for collaboration purposes. It ties to Microsoft Planner, if you know what that is. So it's all in all, it's great. Oh, well, the other thing is it can automatically create a SharePoint site, a shared SharePoint site that they can share files and all of that stuff with as well. So all in all, this is sort of like the powerhouse group, the group Microsoft recommends everybody uses because it allows collaboration. It's great for projects and things like that. So there's a lot of benefits to doing it, to using this type of group. Okay. Last, we have mail-enabled public folders. Now, I will tell you, public folders has been around since the early days of Exchange, going as far, back into the 1990s when Exchange first came out. But I'll also tell you, this is sort of seen as, Microsoft kind of sees this as an old technology that they're sort of deprecating. They're not going to get rid of public folders because they realize that people are still using it, but they're not adding any more features to it. This feature has not changed in years and years because they really don't want people using it. You know what they want people using nowadays? They want you using SharePoint and OneDrive for business, for sharing files with each other. Posting files and sharing files for collaboration. But the idea of public folders was it's a folder that you could share some data in, share some files in, and all that, and it would show up in your Outlook. Now, again, they really want you using SharePoint and OneDrive for business, which also can be utilized with Outlook and all of that also. So this is sort of the old way of doing things, but that was what a public folder. So you could have a public folder called salesdocs@examlabpractice.com, and you could email salesdocs@examlabpractice.com, and the file would go into that public folder, and anybody that clicked on the public folder in Outlook would see those files. That was the idea there. Okay, so that's what collaboration, when they say collaboration, that's what they're talking about. Okay, all in all, though, those are your different recipients and resource types that you have involving Exchange Online. Hopefully now you have a much better understanding and are ready to jump in and do some hands-on. Now, when it comes to setting up mailbox recipients for users, it's really all going to boil down to licensing. And to help you understand this, let me just jump right into Exchange, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here I am on portal.microsoft.com. If I click the Show All Ellipse symbol and go to Exchange, so like in the on-premise versions of Exchange, we would generally go to the EAC, the Exchange Admin Center, and then from there we go to our recipients and mailboxes, and we could just create a mailbox here. But you're going to notice that I don't have an option for just creating a mailbox here. I can add a shared mailbox, but I can't just like create a mailbox for a user here. Another way we would do it in on-premise Exchange, we do it through Active Directory. But now with Exchange Online, it all boils down to licensing. Every user that has a license gets a mailbox, right? So to give you a little bit more information on that, if we go back over here and look at our licenses, so we can drop down where it says billing, we can look at licenses, we can see what licenses we have available. In my case, I've got Office 365 E5. Yours may say Office 365 E5 or may say Microsoft 365 E5. Either way, that license right there is what I'm using to get my Exchange, and I've assigned that to John Christopher. I've got my mailbox associated there. There are other licenses and subscriptions that will do this as well. You may not, by the way, you may not see the same licenses as I have. Again, don't worry about that. I teach a lot of different classes, so I have various licenses for that. But so ultimately, it really doesn't matter if you don't have the same licenses as me. But we can go to the marketplace if we wanted to purchase licenses, and we could go right here to all products. We can do a search or just see what's available. Here's Microsoft 365 here, so we can see what the current price is. And if you go, also, if you were to just do a quick Google or Bing search on Exchange Online, you can see that if you just wanted to get Exchange Online licenses for mailboxes and all that, nothing else, at least as a creation of this video, you can see the prices here. Of course, keep in mind they up these prices all the time, it seems like. I guess blame it on inflation, right? But you see the prices currently. There's Plan 1, Plan 2, and then also the Microsoft 365 Business Standard options. And then, of course, you start getting into Microsoft 365 E3, E5, all that's included as well. But you see what you get: 50 gig mailbox, Outlook on the web, focused inbox, automatic move messages to archive, so you get an archive mailbox. For Plan 2, 100 gig mailbox, built-in data loss prevention, cloud voicemail, so some other benefits. And then, of course, for business, you get all of that, plus you get the apps as well. You only get a 50 gig mailbox, though, with that business standard. There's also business premium. The other thing is, if we do a quick Google or Bing search on the Microsoft 365 licenses for E3, E5, you can see that here. And this is you'll see a family plan, a personal plan, and then if you jump over here to business, that's when you really start getting an enterprise. I meant to say that, but I didn't. So here's the business ones, and then there's business premium, business standard. You can see kind of all the different things that you get there that are available, right? And so there's quite a few options there for just using this for home, for using this for the business versions, and then there's also the E3, E5. And if you do a quick Google or Bing search for just Microsoft 365 E3, E5, you'll come across this little link here, and you can see right here the current going rate for those. Mostly, you're getting a lot of the same things that like Business Premium and stuff does, but they only let you support up to a certain amount of like usually about 200 user licenses before at that point you start having to get into the 365 E3, E5 plans. You can see how much it is a month here. You can see terabyte of cloud storage. You also, of course, get Exchange and all of that. You get all these apps. You get extra security capabilities and all that fun stuff. All right, not really, the point of this video isn't really to dive deep into the licensing. I just wanted to kind of point out that in order for you to have a mailbox for a user, they got to have a license, right? Once they have a license, they will automatically get a mailbox in Exchange Online. Okay, as long as they've been able to license, they will automatically get a mailbox in Exchange Online. From there, the user, they can use their credentials to log on. They can open up Outlook, use their credentials to log on, and away they go. Okay. And the other thing, of course, as far as managing mailboxes is concerned, you can go here under the mailboxes. You can click on the mailbox you want to look at, and you have various tabs. You have a general tab where you can look at some of the contact information here and manage that contact if you need to. You have options for hiding somebody in the global address list if you want. You can see what their mailbox usage is based on how much gigabytes they have left. You can manage some of the email and app and mobile device settings. Keep in mind, this isn't really a video where we dive deep into all those settings right now either. We'll kind of be doing diving into settings along as we go through these videos. But you have the organization tab. You can provide some organizational contact information. You have a delegation. This gets into being able to allow this mailbox to send as. So give send as permission. It allows you to basically delegate to send an email from this mailbox if somebody needs to. And you got send on behalf. This is going to allow somebody to send an email on behalf of this user. So in one instance, you're allowing an email to be sent as this user. Another would be to send on behalf. So it would flag that in the email that was sent. You can also give read and manage full access permissions. This is going to delegate to open up the mailbox and behave as the mailbox owner if you want. You also have some other mailbox settings. You can have message size restrictions here, email forwarding settings here, message delivery restrictions. So you can set a default to receive message from all senders and block from senders if you want. You can have a sharing policy, specify what the role assignment is for this. In this case, I'm using default role assignments. We just got default policies there. Manage policies will let me control the policies here. Again, not really diving deep into the policies in this video. The last thing is other, where I can set some other pieces of information like custom attribute settings that I want to be able to search for a particular user. Okay, like I could flag, flag this attribute here and say, well, this is, I would just put the word admin in there. And basically, in certain areas of Exchange where you can do conditional searches and dynamic lookups for specific attributes, you can look for those keywords for that attribute and flag this user for things such as being part of a certain group if you wanted. Again, not getting deep into that here. I can specify what groups you're a member of. I can set up automatic replies. I can recover deleted items here, convert to a shared mailbox if I want. I can do things like litigation hold, which gets into forensics, mailbox archive. I can set recipient limits here if I want. I can support mail tips that pop up on the screen. Again, I've kind of moved through that quickly because as we go through, we're going to be diving into a lot of this stuff. This isn't really the video where we dive deep into that. So I just wanted to kind of give you a quick a glimpse at those settings. All right. So ultimately, that is going to be our process for assigning a mailbox. Another option, of course, would be if you created a user through PowerShell or something with Microsoft 365, assign the user a license that way. They would get a mailbox that way as well. Ultimately, though, we don't actually create mailboxes through this recipient's mailbox area anymore. It just boils down to assigning a license. All right. Well, hopefully that now gives you a good understanding of how mailboxes get created for our users. Let's now take a look at working with resource mailboxes in Exchange. So here I am on portal.microsoft.com. I'm just going to click the show all ellipse symbol and then go to Exchange. That's going to bring us into the Exchange Admin Center here. And then underneath recipients, we'll click resources. And once we get to resources, you'll see we have a couple of options here. Add a room resource or add a equipment resource. So we'll go ahead and click add a room resource. We can give it a name. I could just call it, we'll just call it Conference Room 1. And then same for the email, Conference Room 1. We'll just do examlabpractice.com. I'm going to click Next. And then capacity, I could say capacity of the room is 20. And then I could say location is, we'll say building 5, suite 300, and that'll be fine. And then set our phone number, whatever we want that to be. Okay, department, maybe this is, we don't have to put a department. Company, we'll say Exam Lab Practice. We'd have a address book policy associated with that. We set the address for it all, the state, zip code, country, all that. So you can fill out anything there you want. Then it says choose when and how the resource should be scheduled. Allow repeated meetings. Allow scheduling only during work hours. Automatically decline meeting outside of the booking limit. So these are your defaults, as you can see. And then you can set a booking window 180 days, maximum duration if you want. For how long it can be booked. And so enter in an automatic message if you want. So you can have an optional automatic message. Thanks for booking room 1. There we go. And then book delegates automatically accept decline meeting requests. So it'll just go ahead and automatically accept, deny based on the criteria we've set. Specify users whom you want to accept or decline meetings manually if we want somebody to kind of oversee that. So we could choose a user to do that. But I'm going to do automatic. We'll click next and we'll click create. All right. And so that'll just take just a moment and it's going to go ahead and create that resource mailbox. Once that's done, we'll just click done and we've created our meeting room. If we wanted to do a piece of equipment, it's basically the same process. We just click add equipment. I could call it something like projector 1, and then we have a name for it, projector 1. Next, fill out the form. So same kind of deal. All right. You can try that out if you want on your own. Now what I want to do is show you kind of the process like a user would go through if they were in Outlook. Let's just jump over to Microsoft365.com and then we'll go into Outlook. From there we will click on our calendar. So we'll find our calendar. Slowly but surely getting there. All right, so then we'll click on a particular day or something, and then from there if we want to set a title, let's say meeting, and then come down here right here. This is the key right here. So I can say browse, all cities. If it might have a little trouble finding it just because it's so new. Let's just put in the word meeting and see if it can find it. Yeah, there it goes. So meeting room 1, you can see it had available 20 people. So I could set that, good to go, and I've set my little schedule there. All right, 30-minute meeting, and it's now on my calendar. So as you can see, that's how a user is going to be able to make use of that. That's the purpose of the meeting room and all of that. Be able to go through and work with the resource that way. So there is the resource for it. I just went back into Exchange Admin Center. If I click on it, you can see, you'll see some of the same options here that you see when you look at mailboxes up here. But you have manage resource details. You've got additional information that can be filled out. Manage contact information. All right. Not do an address book policy. I could hide from the gal. So there's booking details. Manage your delegates. These are things that we set when we created it, right? And then some additional option settings here. These are the same things we filled out earlier. There's your delegation. Send as, send on behalf, read at, and manage full. Same thing we saw with a mailbox. And then others have mail tip. So you have mail tips that display when people send an email to this mail contact. Pops up on their Outlook. All right, and you can manage custom attributes. So a lot of that, again, is the same as what we see over here with mailboxes. All in all, though, as you can see, working with resource mailboxes is relatively easy, both from an admin standpoint as well as the user side. Let's take a look now at how we can work with a shared mailbox in Exchange Online. So here I am on portal.microsoft.com. I'm just going to go over and click Show All, and then I'm going to go and click on Exchange. That's going to bring me into Exchange Online's Exchange Admin Center. Then under Recipients, we'll click Mailboxes, and then you'll see this option here. It says Add a Shared Mailbox. So we're going to go ahead and click that. We'd give it a name. Let's say maybe this was going to be for Help Desk or something. So we'll say Help Desk, and then we'll put Help Desk. In my case, it'll be examlabpractice.com. Alias will just be Help Desk. All right. From there, we'll click Create, and the mailbox will get created. Once the mailbox is created, we can click on that, and we can manage the options here. So the general information for it, same hide from the gal, email app, and mobile. Again, this is a lot of the same stuff we've seen. Email app, manage email app settings. We've got manage mobile devices here. Not diving into all of that in detail right now. And the email addresses it's known by. Okay, right now it's just that. We can't have more than one email address for it to be associated with, though, if we wanted it to be. And we could also go over to organization, fill out organizational information if we want. All these attributes here. We can go to delegation, and of course this is where we would do the give send as permission. So I could say edit. I'll add John Christopher. If I wanted to add other users, I could. All right. I can also support read and manage. So the full, you can basically do this. It says the full access permission allows a delegate to open this mailbox and behave as the mailbox owner. So I'll go ahead and add John Christopher to that as well. Click confirm. All right, it does warn you that it can take about 5 minutes, and sometimes even more than 5 minutes for all this to take effect. So just be aware of that. We'll go over to mailbox. Here's the mailbox settings, size restrictions, email forwarding, message or delivery restrictions. Again, this is the same stuff we've seen before with our mailbox recipients. And then, of course, the same thing here. The other attributes and all that you can configure. All right. So all in all, you also have this option here. It says send on behalf. So they tell you can do the send on behalf permission if you want to allow somebody to send on behalf. So allows the delegate to send an email on behalf of this email, but it will tell the person like who this is really coming from if you do send on behalf. So, and I could allow John Christopher to do that as well if I wanted. So then I'll just hit confirm, and there you go. All right, again, this does take some time before it fully takes effect. So how do we do this as a user? So let me show you how that would work. If we go over to Microsoft365.com, let's open up Outlook, Outlook on the web. And when we go, we would click to create a new message. All right. From there, we're just going to open up this message in full screen, or actually not full screen, but a window. And then we're going to click this, because you'll notice right now it says to and you know, carbon copy and all that, but there's no from option. But if we click options here, we can click show from, and then we can click from. And then if the help desk has not shown up, it's okay. Sometimes it just takes a while, but it's okay if it doesn't show up, because you can always just click other email messages and then you can type it out. Help desk at examlabpractice.com in my case. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Then I could email this to whoever I want to email it to, Tom Williamson or some other email account. I'm actually just going to email it to myself, John Christopher. So we'll do John Christopher JC at examlabpractice.com. We're going to say test from help desk. And we'll just put this is a test, and then we'll click send. All right, and from there, may take just a moment. Let's check our sent items and see if it's sent, and it has, and there's the new email coming in right there. So if we click on that, we can now see that it says it came from help desk. So there it is, help desk. So notice it's not showing that it came from me, it's showing that it came from help desk. So that is how we can utilize a shared mailbox. As you can see, very easy to set that up. Another user like Tom Williamson or some other user could log on and do the exact same thing. So it's the exact same process for the other users that are going to use this account as well. I now want to take a look at how we can work with mail-enabled users and mail contacts now. So here we are on portal.microsoft.com. I'm just going to click the show all ellipse symbol and click Exchange. That'll bring me to the Exchange Admin Center, and then from there we're going to go right down here to this blade under Recipients called Contacts. Once we get in there, you'll notice we have an add a mail contact or add a mail user. I already have one that I've created in another course that I did. You can ignore that user. You don't have to have the same users as me, as I've mentioned previously. But if I want to add a mail contact or a mail user, so let's add a mail contact first. All right, I'm just going to call this mail contact Harry. We'll say Yeomans. All right, and then display name Harry Yeomans, and then alias. We'll just put Harry Yeomans for that as well. I'll make the display name look a little bit more friendly. There we go. External email address. So this would be like, again, if this person was just a contact at our company. So it might be, you know, Harry Yeomans at contoso.com. So this is a user that works for the Contoso Corporation or whatever. Occasionally we might email this person. We want them to go on the global address list and all that. So we click next. Specify any other contact information, mobile phone, work, website, street address, all of that. We could fill all that stuff out. I'm not going to do that, but we could. Click next and then click create. And very easy, as you can see, to create a mail contact that can now show up in the global address list and all that. May take just a moment to populate here, but it will eventually populate and show up right here as well. Let's add a mail user now. So this mail-enabled user, we will call this user Sarah Smith, display name Sarah Smith, external email address. So again, Sarah Smith will get to keep her external email address. Maybe Sarah Smith is a contractor and this contractor is using a personal email address. So we'll say Sarah Smith 1989 at, and we'll just put 1234 at gmail.com. All right, so maybe they're using their Gmail account. So Sarah Smith will be alias, and then we'll say Sarah Smith will be the user ID, Exam Lab Practice. And again, we are creating an account. Remember, this is an actual user account that Sarah Smith can log on to. It's like a guest user account, can log on and get access to things. So then we would just set the password for this user. All right, click next, and then we'll click to create. All right, so we've now officially created the Sarah Smith user account. Again, does take just a moment to appear. You can see the Harry Yeomans account has appeared. So I'll just pause the video for just recording for a second and let that process through. All right, so after doing a refresh, you can see Sarah Smith is showing up. Of course, I can click on each one of these and I can alter the information that I utilized when I was building the user just by simply clicking these links and altering that. I can also hide from the gal, add a mail tip, I can specify personal information, all that. That's for Harry Yeomans, the contact, and then Sarah Smith, remembers, a mail-enabled user, so I can go in and manage the same options there. I also have the other tab that I can specify, though, because this is an actual user. So keep that in mind. So now let's go over to Microsoft365.com and open up Outlook. All right, and let's just see if they are showing up in the global address list. All right, so once I'm in there, I'll click on this people icon, and then I should be able to go and take a look at the global address list here. And so there is Harry Yeomans and there is Sarah Smith. So they're both showing up. I can also click on all contacts and you can see Harry Yeomans showing up because Harry Yeomans is a contact, not like Sarah. Sarah was a mail-enabled user, right? So that's why Sarah doesn't show up here. The only other thing I want to point out is if I go back over to portal.microsoft.com, I wanted to point out that Sarah, remember, Sarah is a mail-enabled user. So if you go to users and go to active users and look to search for Sarah. Now, again, I have a lot of users from various courses I've created. You're not going to have the same exact users as me, but there's Sarah Smith right there. And Sarah will log on as Sarah Smith at examlabpractice.com. If somebody emails Sarah Smith at examlabpractice.com, then it's going to go to that Gmail account that we gave to Sarah. Okay, and so if you wanted to test that out, you could always create yourself, add yourself as a personal email address or something there, and then test that out. But so Sarah Smith at examlabpractice.com. Somebody emails that account. It's not going to go into its own mailbox. It's going to be forwarded to that Gmail account. All right. So that is how that will work. All right. So pretty straightforward. Hopefully you have a better understanding now of working with contacts as well as mail-enabled users. I now want to take a look at how we can work with groups, distribution lists, distribution groups, dynamic distribution groups, all that now. So here I am on portal.microsoft.com. And the first thing to be aware of is it is possible to create groups through this portal. I can go to Teams and Groups, and I can go right here to Active Teams and Groups, and I can add a group this way. And I will recommend, though, if you want the full scope of Exchange Online related groups, do it through the Exchange portal. But if you're just going to do a Microsoft 365 group, a security group or something, then you can do it directly through here. But again, I would recommend going to Show All on portal.microsoft.com, clicking Exchange. Once we get there, under Recipients, we have this blade called Groups. So we're going to click that. Now, first off, let me point out, you will not have, if you're doing this stuff with me, you will not see the exact same groups as me. Remember, I teach a bunch of different courses, and I'm updating my courses all the time. And so things might look a little different for you. That's totally fine. You do not need to see the exact same groups as me. The only ones that matter right now are the ones that we're creating, the one I'm going to create. So I'm going to click Add a Group, and then so you'll see these options here. Very similar to what you saw through portal.microsoft.com, but you didn't see an option for dynamic distribution. And there was also a standalone security group. But here are the different groups that are available. The first one being the Microsoft 365, you'll notice it says recommended. So this is the group that Microsoft recommends that you use. I would probably say I agree with that 100%. This group gives you the most functionality, the most features. You can create a team with the group, calendar, all of that stuff with this type of group, right? So you get the most flexibility with this type of group. So let's go ahead and create a Microsoft 365 group. I'm going to click Next. I'm just going to call this group Help Desk. All right, give it a description. This is the Help Desk Department group. So we'll click Next. We can add an owner. An owner is somebody that owns the group and can go in, and if they want to modify membership of the group, they can. They can add people, remove people themselves. So the idea is to have an owner that could do that. So I'm just going to add myself as the owner, John Christopher. So we'll just add and we'll click next. And then we can add members. Who do we want to be members? So if I wanted to say, okay, well, you know, John Christopher's going to be a member. So I add myself. Maybe I'm going to add any users I've got available. So I could select, you know, whatever users that I want to add, you know, to this group. And if you're doing this along with me and you're thinking, oh, I don't have all these users, you don't have to have all these users. If you want to create some other users to add, you can, but it really doesn't matter because I'm going to be using the John Christopher account for pretty much everything. So I just added some users just so the group has multiple users in it. Notice it also tells you that that John Christopher has a Teams license because it can create a Microsoft team for this if the users have a Teams license. So we can click next, and I'll just call this help desk at examlabpractice.com. Notice it says it's already been taken. It's probably because I've done this with some of my other examples. I'll just call this help desk support. Let's do that. So help desk support will be the email address for it, and then yeah, because I think I created something earlier for help desk, but it was like another demonstration. We'll just call this help desk support. So that'll be the actual email address. Not going to dive into sensitivity labels and all that, but right now, but you can have sensitivities labels associated with your groups. I've enabled some support for all of that in previous lessons. So I had, in other courses. So I have some options there, but don't worry about that right now. Now, public or private. If you look right here, it tells you that public groups can be joined by everyone. So if you make this group public, anyone can just say, hey, I want to join this group, and they can join. Private groups, though, basically are not open for everybody to join, and a group owner are going to be the ones that control it, right? We definitely want this to be private. And then right here, if I want to create a team to go with this, I can. So click next and then click create. This is going to automatically create a team in Microsoft Teams. This is one of the great things about this. It also links to SharePoint as well. So we have a SharePoint site for this, everything. Shared calendar. All right, and so just like that, we've now created our little help desk group. Very easy, very straightforward. Again, if I wanted to check this out in Teams, I could go to Microsoft365.com. Click on Teams, and this is going to bring up the Teams app, and there it is right there on the left side. So you can see we do officially have a team, and anybody else has a Teams license could of course come in here and we could chat and all that fun stuff. So that's how that works. I just wanted to just quickly show you that real fast. All right, so there you go. We've created our help desk group. Let's now add another group. So if we click add group, we have distribution. So this is going to create a distribution list, and it does tell you, hey, you sure you want to do this? Why not create a Microsoft 365 group instead? It's got a lot more features, so it's just kind of warning you. So if I wanted to do that, I'll just call this distribution list, for lack of a better name. Dist list demo. That's my description. I can assign an owner. I'll just make myself the owner. Add, next, and then of course I'll just add myself as a member as well. So anybody, if anybody emails this group, it's going to automatically go to everybody in the group. So anybody that gets added here, I could add a bunch of users if I wanted to. It's going to go to everybody in there. Everybody that's got a mailbox associated here. So we'll click next. So now just add the name. I'll just call this dist group demo. That'll be the email address. It says communication. Allow people outside of the organization to send email to this distribution list. So right now that's not allowed, but if you wanted to allow that, you could. Joining group is open, closed. So right now it's open. Anybody can join to be part of this distribution group or distribution list. It technically is a distribution group, but they also call it a distribution list. So you can kind of use those terms interchangeably. Closed, only group owners can add members, and then owner approval, somebody can request to join, and then you can allow them or not. Then you can also allow leaving the group to be opened or closed. So pretty straightforward. Click next, create the group, And now that's it. Anybody that emails the group, a copy of that email is going to go to everybody in the group. So this is not an actual mailbox or anything like that. It's just going to forward the email to a copy of the email to everybody that's in the group. So very easy to do that, to create that, and it may take some time to. There it goes. There it is to show up. There it is. So then let's go back over here. Add a group. That was distribution group. You got mail-enabled security group, sends messages to all members. So the only real difference between this, I'm not going to create one of these. The only real difference with this and this other one is that it's a distribution list, but you can give permissions to a mail-enabled security group. You can give permissions to things like OneDrive and SharePoint and all that. So it's going to do the same thing. It's a group, put people in it, you email it. Copy of the email is going to go to everybody in the group, but the only difference is you can assign permissions through OneDrive and SharePoint. And then finally, let's talk about a dynamic distribution list, or also known as a dynamic distribution group. It tells you that it sends emails to all members of the list. The group membership list is updated every 24 hours. So every 24 hours, it's going to check for a set of conditions, and based on those conditions, somebody may be a member of that group or not. So if we come right here and click next, I'll just call this dynamic demo. That'll be the name of it. And then click next, and I'll just make myself the owner. All right. So specify the type of recipients that will be members of this group. All recipients, or only the following recipients. So here's one condition you can set. Users with Exchange mailboxes, mail users with external email addresses, resource mailboxes, mail contacts, mail-enabled groups. Of course, at that point, you might as well just choose all. But you can also do membership in, this is the real power of this thing. Membership in this group will be determined by the rules you set below. So I can set, based on these parameters, like department, for example, I could say if your department has the word sales in it, comma, and maybe marketing, maybe I want you to be part of this group. You can add additional rules if you want. All right, then we click next. All right, and then from there, we'll just call this dynamic group demo at examlabpractice.com in my case. Click next, click create. Very easy. All right, and then based on that, when that group gets created, let's go back over here, and there it is right there. Click on the group. And there it is. So sometimes when you come in here, if you come in here very quickly after creating the group, you may get an error and you may have to wait a couple of minutes and just refresh. But you should be able to come in here and change the settings and all of that if you want. You can also go to members and you can say view all members, and you can see who all would be members. Now keep in mind this will take some time, but what it's going to basically do is it's going to go back to the it's going to look at the department attribute of your user. So if I actually go back over to portal.microsoft.com and I look at my users that I have, active users, any user that's created in here, that any user that's created, when you go to add a user, if you've not tried this out, I'll just say test sales user, it'll just be the name. Test sales user. All right, automatically generate password, all that. Assign a license, any licenses I want to assign. Next, and then here it is right here. Right here is where that would matter. So if I had sales or marketing written there, and then I just finish adding the user, what will eventually happen, it's not going to happen right now because remember it'll check every 24 hours. But what will happen is we go back in here to this dynamic distribution, click on this, and eventually what will happen is that user will show up in this group just automatically because this is a dynamic group. Okay, so I can go to members here and view all members, and it'll show up, but it's not showing up right now. It'll take some time to process through. That is the idea of a dynamic distribution list. All right, kind of the concepts there of dynamic distribution lists, and that's how that would work. All right. Now, I will also say that it is possible through Intra Identity, formerly known as Azure AD, to, if you create the group through that, you can actually make a Microsoft 365 group be dynamic as well. But I'm not diving into that in this video. I just wanted to kind of throw out there that it is possible to do that. All right, it's kind of outside the scope of what we're looking at right now. I just wanted to point out that we can do that with the help of Microsoft Intra Identity, formerly known as Azure AD, all that fun stuff. Okay, if you didn't know, Microsoft's changed the name of Azure AD to Intra Identity. But anyway, so there you go. Those are your different types of groups. You definitely can play around with that a little bit and get some hands-on experience with it. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of how all the groups and distribution lists and all that work. I now want to show you how we can work with mailbox permissions and delegation and all that fun stuff. So let's take a look. Here we are on portal.microsoft.com. I'm just going to click the show all ellipse symbol and then go down to Exchange. That'll bring us into Exchange Online's EAC, Exchange Admin Center. Okay, from there, we'll click on mailboxes, and then from there we can choose a user that we would want to perform delegation on, or even if it was just a shared mailbox or something like that. I've just got this user named Tom Williamson. You can choose any user you have. If you don't have a user, you can always just add a user. But if I click on a user and then go right here to delegation, this is where delegation occurs. All right. Now, the first thing I'll show you is just like how to give full permissions. So if you wanted an admin to just basically be able to log on to this person's mailbox and do everything as this person, you can give read and full access right here. You click edit. You can add a user to be able to do that. I'll give this right to John Christopher. Hit confirm. At that point, it does tell you it can take about 5 minutes to take effect. So that is basically gonna let a user, an admin such as myself, go and use this person's account. This is very helpful if this person is not going to be working with the company anymore, and we need to be able to log on to the account and just get access to everything. That's a way to do it. We get access to the entire email environment. We're not having to necessarily reset passwords and all that. It's just going to give me full access permissions over the whole mailbox. Now, what if you just want an admin to be able to send email as the person? Well, you can do send as. And as you can see here, it's very clear as to what this is going to do. And you've even heard me say this already, but this permission allows a delegate to send an email from this mailbox. Message will appear to have been sent from this mailbox owner. So it's not going to say that it came from John Christopher. It's going to say it came from this user. And then send on behalf sounds similar, right? But in this case, the from line in the message is going to indicate that a delegate sent it. So you're basically delegating it and saying, hey, this was sent by John Christopher on behalf of this user, right? And so all I got to do that is just add, an edit, add John Christopher, confirm, and then there we go. And I could do the same thing for this send on behalf if I wanted to support that as well, right? And then again, all I got to do from there is, if I jump over to Microsoft365.com, log on, go to Outlook, I can go to do a new email. All right, pull it up to a window, click options, say show from, and then I can say from, and then I could do this from this Tom Williamson email, right? And I'll just send myself a test email here. Test from John. All right, just type some random text in there, and we'll just click send. Right, so I'm basically now sending on behalf of that. I put John, I'm sorry, I meant to put Tom on that, but I'm sending on behalf of Tom, even though it's myself, John Christopher, sending it. So anyway, click send. Okay, there it is. There's the email inbox. Here's the message. The message appears as though, like I said, it appears as though it came from Tom Williamson, right? Okay, now also if I go right up here and click this icon in the upper right hand corner, I've got an option that says open another mailbox. And so I can put in Tom Williamson at examlabpractice.com and I can open up Tom Williamson's mailbox as Tom Williamson. So that is the idea of giving that full access permission. I can very easily just open it up as that user. All right. Well, now hopefully you have a much better understanding of the concept of giving a full access permission, read and full access permission, as well as how the delegation of send and send on behalf works. I'd now like to go over the mail flow settings that our mailbox recipients have. So here we are on portal.microsoft.com. I'm going to click the show all ellipse symbol and then click Exchange. That's going to bring us into the Exchange Admin Center. Right up under recipients, we'll click on mailboxes and we'll click on a user. I'm just going to click on John Christopher myself here. And if we click on the mailbox tab, you'll notice this area here called mail flow settings, not to be confused with this mail flow drop down, which is a whole other ball game we're not going to get into in this video. We're just talking about mail flow settings. So here are the different options. We've got message size restrictions. And from there, if I click that, it says set a maximum size for message sent and received by mailbox. So you can set what you want the maximum size to be for sent, also for received. All right. They do tell you down here at the bottom you can set a maximum size for sent and received that is between 0 and this number right here. So you can alter that and then click save if you want. From there, we've also got email forwarding. So right now, no forwarding option set currently, but I could if I want. It says you can use the setting to forward email messages sent to the user to another recipient. So if I wanted this to be sent to somebody else, I could forward to an internal email address or forward to an external email address. All right, from there, I've got message delivery restrictions. So I can click manage that, and then it says accept messages from all senders, or I could say select senders. So specify who I want to receive messages from. And then I've got require senders to be authenticated as well. So I could require that everybody has logged on to their account and all of that before they can send me messages. I can say block messages from selected senders as well. So if I don't want certain specific people to be able to ever email me, I could add that right there. All in all, hopefully, though, you're noticing that the MailFlow settings are pretty straightforward on Microsoft Exchange Online. And I want to jump in and talk about public folders in Microsoft Exchange. Now, if you do a quick Google or Bing search on what a public folder in Exchange Online is, they tell you, and this has been around for a very long time, but it's designed to share and make data available, also try to organize data for people to use more in a work group or in an organization, but it's really more geared towards smaller organizations now. Microsoft is, again, they're trying to get away from this as a solution for sharing data. They still make it available, but the thing is they've kind of just stopped adding new features to it or making it any better, because they really want you to use SharePoint and OneDrive for Business and all of that stuff. But you can use it. You can use it for making data available. You create a mailbox. You basically create a public folder mailbox, and from there you can have public folders associated with it. If somebody emails the mailbox, the email goes into the public folder. So it's the gist of it. Let me jump right in and show it to you now. So if we go over to portal.microsoft.com, click Show All, and then open up Exchange. So bring us into Exchange Online. And then if we look down here, you'll see a blade called Public Folders. We'll click on that, and we're going to click on Public Folder Mailboxes, and we're going to add a public folder mailbox. So I'm just going to call this, let's just call it Sales Files. All right. We'll click Add. All right, so it'll take just a moment. It's going to process through, so we'll just let that go through. All right, once that's gone through, it says, all right, sales files will now appear in your list of public folder mailboxes. So we just check it. There it is. It's got a little yellow message that says the user hasn't logged on to the mailbox. That's fine. That's just pretty common. You'll see that. But if we jump over to public folders, we can now add a public folder. So if we say add a public folder, I'm just going to call this, we'll call it sales docs. And I can say, hey, this is mail enabled. Allow external users also to email this if they want. And then I can click add. All right. So from there, we've now got this sales docs folder right here. We can go here and we can see statistics about it. We can put limits on it, set storage quota. You'll notice this use organizational quota default, so I'm not getting into all that right now. You've got deleted item retention, so how long it'll store deleted items before it permanently deletes it. You've got age limits. Of course, all this can be set through your organization, which again, I'm not diving into right now. You can also delegate, so you can say send as or send on behalf. You have the general mail properties. If you want to hide it from the Exchange address list, you can, and then you can also configure the other settings for it as well. All right. So that is how we can create the public folder. We have to have a public folder mailbox first. You've also got this thing called root permissions, and it tells you here you can add or remove users who can access this public folder and edit their permissions. So we'll click add. We can select our users. I'll just add myself, John Christopher. And you can set reviewer, contributor, author, whatever you want. Okay, I'm going to say owner. Set the permissions for the person. Since I did owner, it's going to give all these permissions. But you can, of course, adjust whatever level, and it'll adjust what permissions. But in my case, owner. So I'm going to click Save Changes. And at that point, John Christopher has been given pretty much full permissions over this. All right. So again, we've got sales files. That's our mailbox associated with it. And then we've created the public folder that's going to be underneath that, which is sales docs. All right. So pretty straightforward to create the public folder. All right, so the other thing, let me kind of warn you, if you want to check out public folders in Outlook or whatever, it can take an hour or so sometimes before they'll start showing up. So you do kind of have to be patient if you really want to try out and play around with public folders. I will warn you, this is not really a big emphasis with Microsoft. So I wouldn't worry about becoming an expert on public folders because this is sort of dying out. They're moving onwards and upwards with newer stuff. We'll get more into some of the details on that as we move on, all right? But that's it. That's all the stuff on public folders I'm going to spend any time on. We're ready to move on. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed getting to experience a little bit of this course, and I hope you'll join me on the full adventure. If you'll check the description of this video, you'll see a link that'll show you how you can get access to the full course. Now, in the full course, you're going to learn how to set up a practice environment where you can practice hands-on, and I'm going to provide you with lots of virtual simulations that you can do 24/7. All you need is a web browser. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll also give me a like and subscribe. I'm trying very, very hard to get this channel to build and grow, and so I hope you'll take the time to do that.